Ever wonder which 60s films lit the creative fire in Martin Scorsese, the man behind Taxi Driver and Goodfellas? You're about to walk through the cinema halls he worships. These aren't just films, they're personal obsessions, emotional blueprints, and spiritual guides to one of the greatest directors alive. Buckle up for 15 essential masterpieces that Scorsese insists every true cinephile must experience. Otto e Mezzo, 1963, Federico Fellini. What happens when a director can't make a film, but still creates a masterpiece about the very process of not creating? That's the brilliance of 8½. Federico Fellini's dreamlike meditation on artistic paralysis follows Guido Anselmi, a filmmaker stuck between deadlines, fantasies, and a carousel of women from his past. It's surreal, self-aware, and wildly inventive. So much so that Scorsese once said, "It's the one that opened everything up for me." Marcello Mastroianni stars as Guido, essentially channeling Fellini himself, in a performance full of charisma and anxiety. Behind the camera, Fellini shattered every rule of narrative storytelling. The film shifts between memory, dream, and reality with effortless beauty, powered by Nino Rota's haunting score and Gianni Di Venanzo's heavenly black and white cinematography. Here's a fun fact. The title 8½, refers to the number of films Fellini had made up to that point. 6 features, 2 shorts, and a co-directed project, making this his 8½th film. It grossed modestly in the US, but its real power came later. Generations of filmmakers have cited it as their holy grail. Scorsese, especially, found kinship in its depiction of creative chaos. Watch 8½, and you'll see shades of Raging Bull, The King of Comedy, and even The Irishman, each dancing on the line between truth and illusion. The Leopard, 1963, Luchino Visconti. If 8½, is a dream, The Leopard is a slow, decadent descent into history's grave. Luchino Visconti's epic adaptation of Giuseppe Tomasi di Lampedusa's novel is a swan song for the dying aristocracy of 1860s Sicily. Burt Lancaster plays Prince Salina, a nobleman caught in the crosswinds of revolution and change. And although he's surrounded by opulence, you can feel him slipping quietly into irrelevance. Scorsese is often called The Leopard one of the greatest films ever made, and when you watch it, especially in its full-length Italian cut, you'll understand why. It's visually overwhelming thanks to Giuseppe Rotunno's painterly cinematography. Every ballroom glows like a canvas. Every field of battle feels like oil on stone. Lancaster, initially controversial casting for an Italian epic, delivers a performance of quiet dignity and resigned sorrow. Here's a remarkable tidbit. Visconti was so obsessed with period detail that he reportedly demanded soldiers in background scenes wear authentic hand-stitched 19th century underwear. That obsession paid off. The Leopard won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and influenced everything from The Godfather to The Age of Innocence. Scorsese was mesmerized by its meditation on time and change, and if you pay attention, you'll notice echoes of The Leopard in the quiet tragedy of his most reflective films. Peeping Tom, 1960, Michael Powell. This one rattled Britain to its core. Peeping Tom tells the story of Mark Lewis, a shy, soft-spoken camera technician who also happens to be a serial killer, filming his victims in their final moments to capture true fear. When it premiered, critics didn't just dislike it, they attacked it. The backlash was so severe, it essentially ended the legendary Michael Powell's career. But Martin Scorsese, he called it a masterpiece of psychological horror. Scorsese championed Peeping Tom for decades, even helping restore it for modern audiences. He saw in Powell's film something ahead of its time, an unflinching critique of voyeurism and the dark side of filmmaking itself. The parallels between Mark and obsessive directors weren't lost on Scorsese. In fact, he credits Powell's bravery with shaping his own willingness to explore morally complex characters like Travis Bickle and Jake LaMotta. Karl-Heinz Boehm's performance as Mark is eerie and tragic, a man consumed by the very machine he operates. And the cinematography? Electric. Otto Heller's use of vibrant technicolor to frame acts of terror created a disorienting contrast that still chills viewers today. Ironically, Peeping Tom now stands shoulder to shoulder with Psycho, released the same year, as a revolutionary leap in horror. Scorsese not only embraced the film, he befriended Powell later in life, even helping him find dignity after decades of exile. That's the kind of loyalty only a truly impactful film can inspire. So, if you want to understand where Scorsese got his appetite for psychological depth and visual risk, Peeping Tom is an unmissable landmark. Lavventura, 1960, Michelangelo Antonioni, prepare to be confused in the most elegant, soul-searching way possible. Lavventura begins with a disappearance, but what follows is far from a traditional mystery. A young woman vanishes during a boating trip, but instead of searching for answers, her friends fall into existential malaise, distracted by their own emotional disarray. Martin Scorsese calls Lavventura a game changer, and it's easy to see why. Antonioni rejected the plot in favor of mood, silence, and longing. Every frame pulses with unease, not from what's happening, but from what's not. Monica Vitti's face becomes a canvas of suppressed despair as she drifts through alienating landscapes and fragile relationships. This was a cinema of suggestion, not statement, a revelation for Scorsese, who would later master the same language of emotional ambiguity in films like Taxi Driver and The Irishman. Lavventura was booed at Cannes until it won the jury prize and began to influence an entire generation of filmmakers. Its slow pace and deliberate detachment weren't flaws. They were Antonioni's invitation to question the very nature of human connection. Scorsese has often spoken about how Lavventura changed the way he thought about storytelling, about how space, silence, and stillness could speak louder than dialogue. Shot in stark black and white with a minimalist score, the film turned Italian landscapes into psychological terrain. If you've ever watched a Scorsese film and felt like the silence between characters carried more weight than their words, you have Antonioni and this film to thank for it. Shadows, 1960. John Cassavetes. Raw, improvised, and impossibly alive. Shadows wasn't just a film, it was a revolution. John Cassavetes shot it on the streets of New York with handheld cameras, non-actors, and a jazz musician's sense of rhythm. The story? It follows three African-American siblings navigating identity, romance, and racial tension in beat-era Manhattan. It's rough around the edges, and that's what Scorsese loves most about it. Scorsese once called Shadows the moment American cinema found its soul. Cassavetes was his hero, not just for what he filmed, but for how he filmed it. There were no sets, no scripts really, just raw emotion, human truth, and a belief that cinema could be as spontaneous as real life. The result is electric. Ben Carruthers, Hugh Hurd, and Lelia Goldoni don't perform. They live on screen. The production was chaotic. Cassavetes financed it with his acting gigs and ran out of money more than once. The final cut came together after multiple reshoots and input from friends. But that DIY spirit helped launch the American independent film movement. It also gave Scorsese a blueprint for emotionally unfiltered cinema. You can see Shadow's fingerprints all over Mean Streets and Who's That Knocking at My Door. From the handheld camera work to spontaneous dialogue and deeply personal storytelling, Cassavetes gave young filmmakers like Scorsese permission to feel their way through a scene. Shadows wasn't just a movie. It was a declaration that art doesn't need polish, it needs honesty. Lume Pri, Contempt, 1963, Jean-Luc Godard. Jean-Luc Godard's Lume Pri is not just a film about cinema, it's a film about everything that can go wrong within cinema. From crumbling marriages to clashing egos, this razor-sharp drama takes place on a movie set but unfolds like a slow-motion tragedy. Scorsese has spoken of it as a profound influence, particularly because of its hypnotic rhythm and daring visual language. Brigitte Bardot and Michel Piccoli star as a couple quietly falling apart. As she drifts from affection into coldness, he loses control of her, of the film he's rewriting, and of himself. The cast also includes legendary director Fritz Lang playing himself. That's right, Lang, the godfather of German expressionism, is embedded within this postmodern meta-narrative. It's Godard at his most self-reflective. The color palette alone is enough to stun. Godard and cinematographer Raoul Coutard drenched the film in bold primary colors, reds, blues, yellows, turning every frame into a visual statement. The iconic long takes, especially the slow pan of Bardot lying nude on a bed while her lover describes every inch of her body, are bold and confrontational. Scorsese admired Lume Pri for its courage and modernism. Its score by Georges Delerue, reused decades later in films like The Hours, evokes aching melancholy, and its scenes, dialogue-driven, philosophical, circular, refuse to offer easy answers. For Scorsese, this wasn't just a breakup film. It was a cinematic essay on love, loss, and the compromises that kill art. Red Desert, 1964. Michelangelo Antonioni, color has never felt more suffocating or more beautiful than in Red Desert. This was Antonioni's first film in color, and he didn't just use it, he weaponized it. The story follows Juliana, played with trembling vulnerability by Monica Vitti, as she spirals into a psychological crisis in an industrial wasteland. Factories loom, machines hiss, and modernity seems to crush the human soul under its weight. Scorsese has often cited Red Desert as a hypnotic experience, one that transcends traditional storytelling. Juliana isn't just depressed, she's dislocated from her world. Antonioni paints her surroundings in eerie hues, poisoned greens, muted reds, smoke-stained grays. He even repainted landscapes and buildings to match his psychological palette. The result is a world that feels drained of life, even as it pulses with mechanical activity. Vitti's performance is the emotional core. Her fear, her detachment, her confusion, they're never explained, only felt. There's very little plot here, but that's intentional. This is a film about atmosphere, about how places affect people. For Scorsese, that was revolutionary. He'd later bring that same environmental storytelling into Taxi Driver, where New York becomes a character in Travis Bickle's Descent. Red Desert was a critical milestone, winning the Golden Lion at Venice. It's challenging, no doubt, but Scorsese admires films that demand patience and vulnerability. The Red Desert doesn't comfort you, it disorients you, and in doing so, it shows how the modern world can erode the human spirit. Frame by beautifully toxic frame. Eyes Without a Face, 1960. Georges Franju. Imagine Frankenstein as a poetic fever dream, wrapped in gauze and dripping with dread. That's Eyes Without a Face, a French horror film so haunting, so delicate, that it left Scorsese spellbound. The plot is gothic at its core. A mad doctor kidnaps young women in hopes of restoring his daughter's disfigured face, but Franju transforms it into something tragic and lyrical, almost tender. Pierre Brasseur plays the obsessed surgeon, while Edith Schaub, as the masked daughter, moves like a ghost through the film. Her white, expressionless mask became iconic, later inspiring visuals in films from Halloween to The Skin I Live In. What Scorsese appreciated was how Franju mixed horror with elegance. There's a chilling grace to the way the film unfolds, like a ballet on the edge of madness. Shot in stark black and white, the film blends clinical precision with dreamlike surrealism. And let's not forget the infamous surgery scene, unflinching, graphic, yet somehow still poetic. French audiences were horrified. English critics were outraged. But Scorsese saw through the controversy to its deeper message, the dangers of obsession, the fragility of beauty, and the grief that never heals. Eyes Without a Face wasn't a hit in its time, but its influence quietly grew. Scorsese would echo its themes in The Aviator and Shutter Island, stories where science and madness blur. It's a film that lingers long after the credits roll, not because of what it shows, but because of what it makes you feel. Elegant horror at its most unforgettable. The Hustler, 1961. Robert Rawson. Few films captured grit and glamour the way The Hustler did. It's not just about pool, it's about pride, talent, and self-destruction. Paul Newman plays Fast Eddie Felson, a hotshot pool shark whose confidence is both his strength and his undoing. Martin Scorsese calls it one of the greatest American character studies ever put to film, and it's easy to see why. Newman is magnetic, but it's the emotional vulnerability underneath that hooks you. As Eddie spirals through smoky pool halls and toxic relationships, he collides with two equally unforgettable characters, Piper Laurie's fragile Sarah and George C. Scott's ruthless manager Bert. The film's emotional tension burns as hot as its cue shots. Cinematographer Eugen Shuftan shot The Hustler in shadowy black and white, bathing each scene in moody contrast. The clack of the balls, the echo of defeat, every detail feels like a heartbeat. The production even consulted real-life pool legends to choreograph matches. In fact, Newman practiced endlessly, becoming so good that he later played a more seasoned Eddie in Scorsese's own The Color of Money, 25 years later. That's right, Scorsese didn't just admire The Hustler, he created a sequel to it, revisiting Eddie as a broken man in search of redemption. For him, The Hustler was the rare Hollywood film that married artistry with raw emotion, realism with cinematic poetry. It won 2 Oscars and remains a cornerstone of character-driven drama. If you want to know what inspired Scorsese's love for flawed heroes, The Hustler is your first stop. The Trial, 1962, Orson Welles. Dizzying, surreal, and nightmarish. Orson Welles' The Trial is a descent into bureaucratic hell that Martin Scorsese has often called a film of enormous invention. Adapted from Franz Kafka's novel, it follows Joseph K., played by Anthony Perkins, a man arrested without knowing why and pulled into a web of oppressive systems and distorted justice. Welles made the film in Europe, using abandoned train stations and endless corridors to create a world that feels both vast and suffocating. Scorsese admired the sheer visual audacity. Hallways stretch forever, doors loom like sentinels, and shadows cut through every frame. Cinematographer Edmund Richard captured a constant state of dread, using wide angles and deep focus to trap Joseph in his environment. Perkins, just a few years removed from Psycho, gives a haunting performance of twitchy paranoia. Welles, too, appears as the advocate, a character who seems to know all and nothing at once. The production was chaotic, the script frequently revised, and the budget tight. Yet what emerged is a bold, fragmented dreamscape that has influenced everyone from Terry Gilliam to the Coen brothers. Scorsese was particularly taken with the film's mood, a mixture of menace and absurdity that echoed his own views on authority and justice. While not a commercial hit, The Trial gained cult status, especially among filmmakers who saw in it the freedom to turn psychological torment into cinematic architecture. For Scorsese, The Trial proved that even in madness, there is method, and sometimes the most terrifying villains wear suits, not fangs. Akaton, 1961. Pier Paolo Pasolini. Scorsese has always gravitated towards stories about the streets, gritty, unapologetic portraits of survival, and Akaton, Pasolini's directorial debut, is just that. It follows a pimp in Rome's slums who's slowly drowning in his own aimlessness. He's not glamorous, he's not even likable, but he's human, and that's what drew Scorsese in. Played by Franco Siti, the title character lives on the fringes of society. He begs, manipulates, and wanders through a world that offers him nothing but slow decay. Pasolini, a poet and Marxist before he was a director, shot the film in real Roman neighborhoods, casting non-professional actors and relying on stark black and white visuals. Scorsese admired Pasolini's ability to combine street realism with spiritual grandeur. The film is scored, paradoxically, with soaring music by Johann Sebastian Bach. That contrast, ugly lives underscored by divine music, was revolutionary. It's something Scorsese himself would replicate in Mean Streets and Goodfellas, blending violence with beauty, brutality with grace. Akaton was condemned by some and celebrated by others. But for Scorsese, it was a revelation. Here was a filmmaker who wasn't afraid to linger on poverty, on sin, on the sacred embedded in the profane. Pasolini taught him that realism doesn't mean lifeless. It can be raw, operatic, and deeply human. And Akaton, for all its despair, pulses with a soul that refuses to die. Band of Outsiders, 1964. Jean-Luc Godard. You've never seen a heist movie quite like this. In Band of Outsiders, Godard rewrote the rules of the genre with a wink, a shrug, and a jolt of jazz. The plot is deceptively simple. 2 young men and a shy girl plan a robbery. But what unfolds is a playful, tragic, and utterly hypnotic love letter to youth, crime, and cinema itself. Scorsese has frequently spoken of his admiration for Godard, especially this film. There's something electric about its spontaneity. One minute they're plotting a robbery, the next, They're dancing in a cafe in the now iconic Madison dance scene, which Quentin Tarantino later paid homage to in Pulp Fiction. Goddard wasn't just playing with narrative, he was breaking it open, revealing its bones. Anna Karina, radiant and enigmatic, leads the trio with a performance that feels both spontaneous and eternal. The cinematography, handled by Raoul Coutard, feels almost improvised, chasing characters through alleyways and into subway cars. There's a palpable sense of freedom in every frame. Scorsese embraced that freedom in his own early films. Mean Streets, in particular, owes much to Band of Outsiders, with its handheld energy and characters caught between recklessness and despair. The film flopped on initial release, but it found new life decades later, embraced by directors who understood its subversive brilliance. And watch Band of Outsiders, not for the plot, but for the feeling. It's about people drifting through a world they don't understand, something Scorsese has always captured with heartbreaking clarity. It's youthful, tragic, and rebellious. In short, essential. The Gospel. According to St. Matthew, 1964, Pier Paolo Pasolini, forget what you think you know about religious epics. Pasolini's The Gospel. According to St. Matthew, Matthew strips away the grandiosity of Hollywood's biblical films and delivers something raw, reverent, and revolutionary. Scorsese, a lifelong student of theology and visual storytelling, considers this one of the most powerful religious films ever made, and it deeply influenced his own The Last Temptation of Christ. Pasolini, a devout Marxist and atheist, approached Christ not as a deity, but as a radical. The result is a Christ who is fierce, angry, defiant, and deeply human. Enrique Irazoki, a Spanish student with no acting experience, plays Jesus with piercing intensity. Shot with non-professional actors in the sun-scorched landscapes of southern Italy, the film echoes neo-realism while evoking spiritual transcendence. Scorsese was especially struck by Pasolini's use of music. Bach, Mozart, African chants, and folk songs, all layered over grainy black and white imagery to create an experience that feels both ancient and eternal. There's no studio polish here. Instead, we see dusty robes, cracked feet, and fierce eyes proclaiming truth to power. Despite, or perhaps because of, its radical vision, the film was embraced by both the Vatican and global critics. Scorsese saw in it the possibility of cinema as sacred art, not just spectacle. For him, it wasn't about faith in doctrine, it was about faith in truth. If you're moved by the moral battles in silence or the agony in The Last Temptation, know this. Pasolini walked that path first. And The Gospel. According to St. Matthew, remains one of the most intimate portrayals of the divine ever committed to film. Faces, 1968, John Cassavetes. Here's another punch to the gut from Cassavetes, this time examining the quiet implosion of a marriage. Faces is a film built from glances, arguments, silence, and collapse. It's about the gap between people who once loved each other, and how that gap swallows everything. Scorsese has said that Cassavetes taught him how to listen to characters. Faces don't have a traditional structure. Instead, it drops you into a whirlwind of late-night confessions, awkward laughs, and raw vulnerability. John Marley and Lynn Carlin play a middle-aged couple falling apart in real time, their faces etched with exhaustion and disappointment. Shot in gritty 16mm black and white, the film feels more like a documentary than a drama. The camera lingers, almost uncomfortably, as conversations unravel. There's no escape into plot, only confrontation, intimacy, and the slow erosion of connection. Seymour Cassel, in a breakout role, adds a spark of reckless charm and vulnerability that complicates everything further. Scorsese admired Cassavetes' refusal to flinch. These weren't characters. These were people, exposed in all their messiness. That sensibility permeates Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Raging Bull, and The Irishman. Every painful silence and emotional explosion owes something to Cassavetes' courage. Faces was nominated for 3 Academy Awards and became a landmark in American independent cinema. But more than that, it's a mirror. You watch it and see yourself. Flawed, trying, breaking, loving. And for Scorsese, that's what cinema is all about. Il Sorpasso, 1962, Dino Risi. We end with a deceptively breezy ride through sunlit Italy, a ride that takes a sharp, unforgettable turn. Il Sorpasso starts as a carefree road movie. Two strangers, an extroverted playboy and a shy student, team up for a spontaneous drive through Rome. But as their journey unfolds, the laughs give way to something deeper, darker, and altogether heartbreaking. Scorsese adores this film for its tonal brilliance. It dances between comedy and tragedy without warning, and the ending hits like a car crash, literally and emotionally. Vittorio Gassman, as the charming yet empty Bruno, delivers a performance of magnetic danger. Jean-Louis Trintignant's reserved Roberto becomes the soul of the film, slowly unraveling under Bruno's chaotic influence. Risi's camera captures Italy's shifting post-war identity, modern but morally adrift, glamorous yet unstable. What begins as a lark becomes a sobering commentary on masculinity, class, and wasted time. Scorsese has often pointed to Il Sorpasso as a major influence on Goodfellas, particularly the way it seduces you with charm before revealing the cost. The film was a hit in Italy but took years to gain global recognition. Its legacy now towers. Tarantino, Soderbergh, and Scorsese all cite it as essential. That ending, abrupt, brutal, and silent, echoes in films like Casino and The Departed. You don't see it coming, but once it hits, it stays with you. There you have it, 15 unforgettable films from the 1960s that helped shape one of the greatest directors of all time. These aren't just Martin Scorsese's favorites. They're the blueprints for his genius, and maybe yours too. If even one of these gems found its way onto your watch list today, then this journey was worth it. Don't stop here. Cinema's golden vault is just beginning to open. Hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into forgotten classics and filmmaker favorites. Ring the bell so you never miss a real worthy story. And tell us in the comments, which of these blew your mind and which do you plan to watch next?